Hello viewers, and welcome to a lecture on conversion, storage, editing and various formats. In previous lectures, we had discussed the process of production of a film from the time the scripting is complete to the time the shooting is complete. Today we'll be taking this process further and we'll be discussing what happens to a film after the shooting has been completed to the time it's actually shown on screen. This process overall is called the post-production process. In earlier times, most of films were shot on 35mm or 16mm celluloid strips. But these days, most films are shot on digital format, which means all the audio and video information is recorded as digital files on a computer. Throughout the post-production processes, these digital files undergo various transformations, and understanding these transformations is important to understanding the post-production process. And this is what we will discuss today in this lecture. With me, I have Professor Shoykot Roy, who is a professor in the Satyajit Ray Film and Television Institute, and he's also a renowned editor.
Hi. Before we start the process of film editing as such, let us discuss about formats. As in, we have been hearing many issues regarding formats, and it's very difficult to really say what a format means. In the analog world, when we were shooting on celluloid, that is film strips, format usually meant the area that is covered by the image. Okay, and we used to call them 16mm films, 35mm films. But 16mm and 35mm, these two figures referred to the breadth of the film from edge to edge, not the image size. But as we moved into the digital platform, the term format meant something else. In the digital platform, a format means the codec that we are using for encoding that video file, and also the length and the breadth of the image. That is the number of pixels that I have from left to right and the number of pixels that I have from top to the bottom.
So let me understand this. As opposed to the analog format, in the digital format, what happens is that light falls on the sensor of a camera, and that optical information is transferred, or rather transformed, into some kind of an electronic information.
Yeah, exactly.
That electronic information is then stored in the camera as a digital file.
Yeah.
And that digital file has a format.
Yeah, that digital file is now encoded by the camera itself, and this is called a codec. The word codec is derived from two words, the coder and the decoder.
But why is this encoding necessary? Why can't we just take the information in its raw form and just store it in a hard disk?
Yeah, both the things are done actually. For high-end cameras, we do not encode the files, and they are actually called raw files, where we are not using the codec, or we are not using the formulas to encode the files.
Right.
But in case of, say, pro-consumer series or even professional cameras which are used for television, we need to encode files because these files are then usable, or readable rather, by computers in the post-production process, which is very essential. Otherwise, if you are using raw files, the computers won't be able to read these files. Okay. In case of raw files recording, as in case of high-end cameras, like when we are shooting films, then the raw files are then converted to smaller proxy files, which are then readable by normal computers. In a later stage, when the film is finally ready to be delivered, then these raw files are referred back and we deliver the film on a larger format, that is on a raw without encoding and something like this.
So coming back to the format when encoding is done, what are the ways in which encoding is done, and what are the parameters of a picture that we get to know when we hear that a particular format has been used? Let
me give you an example. If I say that a particular video file is using a format called XD cam, say if I tell you that I'm shooting on XD cam 1080i25, this is the name of a format, which means that I'm using a codec, or I'm using the formula for encoding, which is called XDCAM. Okay. This is patented by a particular company. And I'm using 1080i, which means that I'm using 1080 pixels from top to the bottom.
Vertical pixels.
Vertical pixels. And 1920, this is HD. So 1920 is always a fixed figure from left to right. Okay. And I'm using 25 frames per second. And I'm also using interlacing for recording the video, for which I am using the word I, the letter I. If I'm shooting on progressive, I'll use the word P. In that case, I'll call this XDCAM 1080p25. Okay. There are other frame rates also. There are 25, there is 24 or 30 FPS, or there are other frame rates like 23.97, 29.97, and so on and so forth.
Coming back for a minute to the figure 1080, you said that having that number in your format specifies the number of pixels, vertical pixels in the picture. But you also said that 1920 is a fixed figure that which refers to the number of horizontal pictures. Why is that so? And what is the aspect ratio that we get in this format?
See, for HD, there is a standardized aspect ratio which is called 16:9. That is, for every 16 pixels from left to right, I'll have 9 pixels from top to the bottom. So this is a kind of a wide picture. But say, for example, I need to show a film which is not shot on 16:9. In that case, I may change the aspect ratio. Okay. In that case, 1920 remains fixed, but 1080 is compromised. In that case, I'll have 1920 by, say, 720 if I have a 2.35 film ratio.
Okay.
So that is how it changes. So 1920 is fixed.
So when we are talking about formats, one of the obvious questions that comes to mind is, why do we have so many different formats? And when a filmmaker is about to shoot a film, how would he choose which format is good for him?
The thing is that, see, these codecs are patented and they are developed by different companies. Of course, there are rivals, and there are different companies that develop different formats and codecs. So that is one aspect. So some company is producing some things, the other company is producing something. So a camera produced by some company will have a certain codec, okay, and a camera manufactured by some other company will have some other codec. So it's a choice about camera. So if the producer thinks that, okay, this camera is good for me, the lenses are good, so he has to go for that format. This is one aspect. And the second thing is the cost. There are certain codecs which are heavy in size. That is, it will give you files which are very heavy in size. And there are certain other codecs which are very light, although they are giving you 2K, 4K images, but they are very light. So say in a scenario where you're shooting documentary films, where you are carrying a very small camera, in that case you will choose a codec which will not require so much of storage space, but will still deliver an acceptable quality of image. So these are the two factors that matter. But say in a film where you have very difficult graphics or you have special effects, in that case you need to choose a codec which is giving files which are heavier in size. Heavier in size would mean that the information is more. So if you want to change something, you want to change the color, you want to superimpose something, so heavier files will be beneficial.
The next step is, once shooting ends, of course, these files now have to be converted. Why is such a conversion required? Why can't we take the file as it is, as it has been shot, and edit it directly?
There are two reasons for this. The general process is that once the shooting is over, we convert these files to proxy files. Proxy files are lightweight files which can be run on any computer. Any computer in the sense, any decent computer which can run an editing software. You don't need faster hard drives for this. So these are converted to proxy files. One reason being that the files are light and it's easy to work on computers. Second reason is the producer is keeping his raw files or master files with himself, and he's giving the proxy files for editing. So the chances of piracy is less. So these are the two reasons why conversions for editing is necessary.
Once the conversion is done, can we go straight to editing, or are there intermediate steps we have to take care of?
No. While the conversion is getting done, we need to think about the storage part of it. because nowadays we do not have anything physical. Everything is recorded on a hard drive. So what we need to do is we need to take multiple backups and multiple backups on RAID hard drives. So storage is a crucial issue, and it's so important nowadays that there are companies which only deal with storage and backups.
So once the digital files have been produced by the camera, they have been converted to be usable by the computers, backups of the master copies have been taken. The next step is the actual editing. And this is the most exciting part of the entire post-production scenario, of course, because this is where we actually get to see the film taking shape. However, the process of editing itself can be divided into several sub-stages, and each of these stages has its own procedures and rules to follow. For example, we have processes called logging, assembly, rough cut and final cut, which we'll be discussing now. Can you tell us a little bit about some of these stages? Let's start with logging.
Yeah.
What is that?
See, the editor is the person, usually, is the person who is not present during the shoot. So, the editor is watching the rushes for the first time. He was not there during the shoot, so he has got no idea what has been shot. So, he is the person who looks into the rushes, decides what to keep, what not to keep. Of course, he is also supplied with a sheet, which is called a continuity sheet, which indicates a shot as NG, which is a not good shot, and OK shots. The first thing that he does is he logs all the shots. That is, which is the process is called logging. Logging, as the name suggests, it is like you are marking the shots according to its features, like it's a long shot or this shot belongs to this scene, and he keeps these files in particular folders so that the entire project is organized. So if I want to see all the shots that are shot for scene 17, so a particular folder will give me all the shots that are shot for scene 17, and so on and so forth. After this process of logging is over, the editor first does the assembly.
But before we go to that stage, is the process of logging entirely a mechanical process, or does when the editor is viewing the rushes for the first time, obviously it must be kept in mind that they're being viewed out of context, because films are often shot not in continuity. So there you're seeing maybe one shot from scene 17 and then another shot from scene 19. So making sense of the narrative context of each shot is difficult. However, even at this stage, is there some qualities of the shot that an editor looks for, or is it just simply a question of sorting them out and putting them in different bins?
As I told you, editor watches these rushes for the first time. Maybe he has got no idea about what the scene should look like. At this stage, the editor doesn't decide which shot to keep and which shot to mark as not granted or not good. He watches the entire rushes, whether NG or OK. Okay, so that at the back of the mind, he is trying to develop what the film may look like. Okay, if you are talking about the director at this stage, the director already knows that, okay, these are the shots that I have shot for scene 17. So he knows that, okay, although these are scattered, he knows what to keep. But the editor is not there now, right now. So as of now, he'll only log these files according to scenes, takes, shots, etc. and keep it in a bin. This question will only come when the assembly stage arrives. This is the first stage where the scenes are accumulated. The shots are sorted out and they are kept according to scenes. And a rough edit is done. So that more or less, it's more or less the film is more or less, as in the editor knows that, okay, this is what the film is going to look like. Okay, as in at a very, very rough stage. So this is called the assembly. So I have scene 1, scene 2 through scene 70 or 80. Okay, and this assembly may be, say, 3 hours or 4 hours long.
So at this stage also, even though usually the director is not present during the editing, probably some kind of a communication is also happening between the editor and the director, because even during shoot, the director or even the cinematographer sometimes would keep notes about each shot, which the director would be viewing and would be consulting while logging an assembly as well, and these will be taken into account when the assembly is being done.
Yeah, of course, because the director also knows a lot of other things that the editor may not notice. So there are certain issues, the acting was not right, this is not the kind of acting that I want. The cinematographer may say that this is not the lighting that I want for this particular scene. So these are notes that are kept with the shots, and the editor also takes into account that, okay, these are the comments that are given by the director and the cinematographer, so I should also consider these.
So coming back to the assembly, when the assembly is complete, in what form is the film now in? How much of the film can we see when in the assembly?
In the assembly stage, the film is very, very loose. In a particular action, I may have multiple shots, multiple usable shots. The editor is not in a position to decide whether to keep this shot or that at the assembly stage.
But the scenes have been put in order?
They are put in order.
And and within the scenes have the continuity?
At this stage, at this stage, the scenes are put in order, but according to the script.
Right.
The editor actually has not really thought about the film by now. So it's like it's the script that has been translated into a timeline.
Okay.
So that is the assembly stage.
And do we have the beginning of continuity in this at this stage, or does that come
more or
later?
less? More or less, the continuity and everything is taken care of, but with multiple takes maybe. In certain cases, you may have, say, 3 shots instead of 1. So the editor may take this decision later.
Generally, once this assembly is done is when the director would come into the picture physically again, and maybe there would be a joint viewing with the editor.
Yeah, if you are talking about big productions, assembly is often done by assistant editors. The editors do not get involved in the assembly stage. The assistant editor does it because you have a script reference. Here you can consult your script. This is your scene, and these are the shots that are being shot for this scene. So he assembles the entire thing. So this is usually, for big productions, this is usually the work of an assistant editor. So the editor may not be present, the director may not be present at all. But if the director is interested, he can also be present in the assembly stage.
But once the assembly is done, both the director and the editor would physically come in.
Yeah. After the assembly is done, the editor will come in, the main editor, the chief editor, and he will now decide what to keep and what not to keep.
So now that the editor has come in, and from the assembly, what are the next stages that he has to take the film
from
through?
the assembly, the film now starts taking shape, and what is achieved after this is called a rough cut. A rough cut is almost what the director wanted in terms of the script, as in that is the script that is written, and the editor tries to follow the script in a way and develop the film as the director has conceptualized. And maybe the assembly was 4 hours long. I'm targeting a film which is, say, 90 minutes in length. So a rough cut should be around 2.5 hours, or maybe 2 hours. It can be lesser also in certain cases, but usually it's more than the desired length of the film.
And also during the rough cut stage, you have the sound, at least a semblance of some sound design happening during the rough cut stage.
Because since we are trying to get the film now, certain sequences which may not look proper without music. There are certain sequences which may not look proper without, say, dialogue dubbing or additional sound recording. So these things are done, but it depends on the kind of film that you have shot. In many cases, the music is done later, but in most cases, at this rough cut stage, the music is more or less, at least a reference music is placed on the timeline.
I think one of the reasons for this is that an assembly, as opposed to an assembly, which is meant to be only seen by an editor or director or other people who are directly involved in the making of the film and have the technical knowledge to be able to understand what an assembly, to be able to understand a film from an assembly. A rough cut is meant for a relatively wider audience. You know, people like the producer might come to watch the rough cut, the actors might come to watch the rough cut, and they may not necessarily know all the technicalities, but when they see a film, they need to get the feel of the film overall. So it is more, even though it's called a rough cut, it's actually more of a finished product.
Yeah, yeah. It is finished to a point that it looks like the film. Looks like a film, yeah. So generally, the producer may bring in other people, the actors may come in. So all these people join to see a rough cut screening. So advantage is, at this point of time, the people who were not involved in the post-production process now watches the film for the first time. So he may have certain, or they may have certain observations regarding a particular scene, whether it's necessary or whether a scene is at all working, whether a particular emotion is coming out or not. So these feedbacks are taken by the post-production crew, mainly the editor and the director, and they are implemented later on the next stage or the next level of editing.
And it is also at this stage that the major restructuring of the film can happen.
Yeah, yeah. Right. At this stage, because with the feedbacks, with everything all put together, with reactions from different kinds of people, the director and the editor both can think about restructuring the film, which is completely different from what the script was like. So scene number 7 can be scene number 1, scene number 70 can be scene number 13. So, and you may not have seen scene 25 to scene 30 in the film. So anything can happen. So these things are now tried out, and after you try out something new, you get a rough cut screening, and you finally see that people are now accepting the film more. So
sometimes even some reshooting might be required.
Reshooting is also required in certain cases. Yeah,
this is especially true in the case of documentaries, for example, where on the basis of certain cuts, the director decides that he needs additional material, so he goes out to shoot and then comes back and edits again. So editing and shooting happen as complementary processes. So at the rough cut stage, the editor to a large extent even dictates what kind of additional shooting would be happening. Not dictating, but at least suggesting.
Yes, yeah. Because he is the person who can now see the film. He can now see the final film, which the director may not see, because the director has had a different idea about the film. So director had conceptualized a film which is very different from the film that is on the table right now. So first of all, he is not happy, and secondly, he is more or less not willing to accept that the film has changed. So the editor has to fight with this. The editor has to convince the director that, okay, now what you're making is going to look better than what you had conceptualized.
In defense of the director, I must say that the director and his team, they often put in a lot of effort into shooting certain scenes or certain portions of the film.
Yeah, exactly.
And naturally they get attached to it. Sometimes at the planning stage, a certain part of the film seems crucial, and the whole film is centered around that. But during the editing, or sometimes even during shooting, plans have to be changed, and that part which originally was crucial to the film is no longer crucial to the film. And we need somebody fresh to be able to say that.
To be very honest, see, a producer who has spent, say, 50 lakhs of rupees for a scene, and the editor in one fine morning says that, oh, you don't need this scene at all in the film. So you just think about the producer and the director who has spent, say, 1 month for shooting a certain planning, shooting everything for a certain scene. It's very, very difficult to accept. But finally, I think for the sake of the film, he has to accept what looks better.
So by the time the film comes out of the rough cut, it has, all the scenes have been put in order. The shots within each scene has been put in continuity. The structure of the film has been more or less fixed, and we also have the basic sound design in place. So once all of this has been done, what remains to be done? What is the next stage in the editing process?
The next stage in the editing process is that, see, there are two things that happen parallelly at this stage. The music director, the sound designer, the person who is actually going to do the sound design, they take rough cut outs, okay, and they start working parallelly. So the music director then brings back the final music, and the editor finally reaches the final cut stage. In the final cut, it's also called a fine cut, where the editor, depending on the music, depending on the final dubbed dialogues and everything, maybe voiceovers, etc., depending on all these things, he does the final edit. That is, even a change of say 2-3 frames here and there, finally changing a certain shot, reducing a shot, etc. So all these things are done at the final cut stage, and by the end of the final cut, the film should be ready, and only mixing of the audio should be left as far as the timeline is concerned, and the color correction would be left. Otherwise the film is ready to be shown to people.
So we have seen in this conversation how during the editing process the film is often remade, or it has to be sometimes physically reshot, sometimes it has to be restructured. So the film is born again and again and again during the editing process itself. And often what we see finally as in the final cut is different, very different from what had originally been thought of. Can you think of any other examples, apart from the ones we have already discussed, of where an editor makes a significant contribution to the storytelling process itself during the post-production stage?
Yeah. See, when the director is writing the story, or maybe if he's writing the script himself, when he's writing it, he is imagining certain kind of an acting, he is imagining certain kind of characters in the film, but when he's shooting the film changes, because the character is now getting enacted by an actor, and his gestures, his kind of delivery and everything changes the characters, changes the story, in a way changes the story, which also leads to change of structures and everything. So the editor is now in a position to decide whether to change the structure according to the acting or stick to the script. In many cases he would like to stick to the script, but in many cases it also happens that depending on the actor, depending on the character that is coming out right now, he may change the storyline, the structuring, or even certain shots to make it even better. And the dialogues which are not spoken in the film or during shooting, there are actors who can act so well that even a gesture talks much more than a dialogue. Okay, so in certain cases, these silent pieces of expression can evoke emotion which are far, far better than what the director had planned earlier. Maybe the director had planned a dialogue for a certain emotion, but after the shooting was done, after the editing was over, the editor realized, and the director of course realized, that a certain gesture works much better than the dialogue. So a new film is born. The original script is now ignored. Original dialogues are now ignored, and they start developing a new film altogether. So in various stages, the film gets a new look, a new form. And so if you compare the final film with the script, you will see in many places it's very, very different.
Thank you very much. In today's discussion, we have seen how films, like cats, have many lives. They begin as an idea in somebody's head, then they become written words on a piece of paper, then they are a performance which is enacted in front of cameras and sound recorders. After that, they become digital files which are transformed in various computers by sound designers as well as editors. And in this lecture, we are specially focused on the process of editing and how through the creative contributions of the editor, the film undergoes several transformations, several rebirths during the process of editing itself, so that the final film often becomes something different, something richer, something much better than what had been originally thought of by either the writer or the director. Thank you very much for being with us in this lecture. We look forward to seeing you again in the next program.